Chapter 14. How they lived together and yet apart. As Hope had foreseen, the recovery of her health, sufficient at all events to permit of her undertaking household duties, was the signal for Madame Roscova's departure. She had hinted at it many times, and had yielded as often to Hope's earnest entreaties, and remained. "My dear," she would say of a night, with more than a suggestion of reproof in her manner, "Serge Petrovitch and I have been very good friends, and I am greatly beholden to him. But he will begin to hate me soon if I keep you away from him like this. It is not in nature, and it is not right. If you really want me to stop, you two occupy this room, and I will sleep on the hearth out there." "No, no, Anna," Hope would make haste to reply. "You must not go. Serge is quite content, and so am I do assure you. It is enough for us that we are together." And then would she blush, rosy red in the merciful darkness, and wonder if her soul was imperiled, past redemption by such unblushing lying. And Anna Roskova said little, but wondered much, and sighed for her own lonely exile in Yakutsk, and thought again how different it would have been with them, and deemed Hope but a cold wife. But with returning health and the retuning of her jangled nerves, Hope's outlook on life became to assume its normal aspect. Matters began to settle themselves into their proper places and to take their proper proportions. She saw that no one was to blame for what had happened, that the strange mischance which had cast her into Pavloff's keeping, while her husband wandered at large between Yeniseisk and London, was the outcome of no plot, but a valiant attempt to benefit her. She recovered her trust in herself and her faith in Paul Pavloff. She saw that Pavloff was right, and that the only thing possible to her was to wait patiently till they should hear from Serge. And she set herself bravely to adapt herself to the required conditions. And so it was with a certain equanimity that she one day received Madame Roskova's announcement that Maria Verskaya was sick and had begged her to come and stop with her, and she was going on the morrow. "Da," said Madame, when Hope raised no objection, but simply expressed her regret at Maria's illness. "So you are reconciled to him at last, and don't mind my going. That is right, and as it should be, and I am glad of it." "I am very, very grateful for all your kindness, Anna. I never can forget all you have done for me. But as you say, da, child, that is all right. I am rejoiced to think that all is right again between you. I have thought you a stone, for the lack is not on his part. He loves you as much as ever. He is on fire for you, and no wonder. I can hear it in his voice when he speaks to you, and see it in his eye when he looks at you. He just worships you, my dear. So be you good to him, for he is a man beyond most." And Hope knew it all, and was troubled for him, for she knew that the fire would never break forth to her undoing. It might burn and burn till it consumed him, but the flame would never scorch her, nor the smoke besmirch. "You will let me bring in some of the others now and then?" asked Madame Roskova before she went next day. "They are all hungry to see you, and they will talk, and it will do none of you any harm now. It has been all I could do to keep them away, but now you are all right again." "Surely, Anna, I shall be glad to see them now. While I was lying broken there, it would have driven me crazy, but now I shall be glad." So Madame Roskova squeezed into a corner of the little hut up the valley with Maria Verskaya and Dmitri Polakov, and sorely missed the wider atmosphere of the doctor's house. For Maria had a lively tongue, and her alleged sickness did not extend to it or in any way affect it, and ceaseless chatter becomes at times a weariness to the flesh, to say nothing of the soul. Dmitri, when he heard of Madame Roskova's coming, breathed a silent but fervent "God be thanked," and welcomed her warmly. Maria launched 20 questions at her concerning Madame Palma before she had got her cloak off, and Anna, knowing her friend, replied with discretion and supplied no grist but only chaff to Maria's chattering little mill. So Hope Palma and Paul Pavloff entered upon a new phase of the strangely twisted story of their lives, a phase which tested and tried them both in many ways, and was to Pavloff as the breaking of seals and the dipping, chancely and hazardously, into the pages of the unknown. He learnt much of woman and her ways, and at times it set his head spinning, and at times twisted his heartstrings. Learning is bittersweet, at times a deep delight, and again a long travail, and the understanding of even one woman was beyond the wisdom of the preacher, whose experience had been wider than most. They sat long before the stove in silence that first night of their solitariness, both their minds running swiftly in the same direction, but on different lines. When would they hear from Serge? Would they ever hear from him? Supposing they did not. Supposing they heard of his death. The silence was verging on the irksome when Pavloff broke it, in fear that it might become painful to her. "I am glad you let Anna Vassilievna go, Hope Ivanovna. It tells me that you trust me. She has been very good to me, and I shall always be grateful to her, but since you can trust yourself in my hands, it will make things easier for you to be without her, I think." It would have been impossible to go on much longer like that. She is a good woman. She was growing importunate about us. If we could only have told her the whole matter. A whisper of it getting out would have destroyed us all. Anna Vassilievna is more trustworthy than most, but the matter is so very strange that it would have been almost too much to expect her to keep it entirely to herself. Even if she did not speak of it, her manner might have set folks wondering, and one cannot be too careful when lives are at stake. "I have no doubt you are right. In any case, it is too late to tell her now," she said quietly. There was in this new atmosphere a sense at once of relief and restraint. With Anna Vassilievna's puzzled eye no longer on them, they were able to be themselves again without necessity for guarding every word and look. And this in itself was a mighty relief, for false pretense is mother to awkwardness, and the natural man is the honest one, the man who is just himself and claims no more. And now, too, they could discuss their affairs in a way that was not possible before, and therein also lay elements of enlightenment. But even in this new freedom, there was also a novel sense of restraint in the ever-present knowledge that they two, of all people in the world, were alone together in surely as strange and anomalous a companionship as the world had ever seen. And these mingled feelings again made at once for speech and for silence, and so their talk was intermittent and discursive. Pavloff, when he spoke to her, kept his eyes rigidly on the glowing embers, lest she should see in them that which would not be suppressed, but which he still would not have her see. And how should he, untutored man, know that she saw it all in the very stiffness of his manner, that it cried aloud to her in every tone of his voice whenever he pronounced her name? For to woman has been given a sense denied as a rule to man. She knows by instinct when a man loves her. And Hope Palma knew that this man loved her still, in spite of himself, as much as he had ever loved her, and that was with every fiber of his being. And so, when her eyes rested on him, she already found a difference in him since Anna Vassilievna left them. For eyes, after all, are but windows, and the soul that looks out of them colors all it sees with somewhat of itself. And yet again, perhaps after all, there was in him a subtle and almost indefinable change bred of these new circumstances, the unintentional outward manifestation of these mixed feelings of freedom and restraint. He was at once stiffer and gentler than when Anna was there, for then he had to assume a warmth of demeanor befitting their supposed relationship, and to both of them it was merely an assumption and meant nothing. And now that no assumption was necessary, though all the warmth was in him still, his fear lest his real feelings should show through stiffened his manner and made it seem unduly cold and formal. Many were the nights they sat so during the first weeks of their release from Madame Ruskova's kindly supervision, discussing at times, and from every point of view, Serge's chances of escape and the prospects of their hearing of it, but as often sitting in the silence of their long, long thoughts. "You really think Serge would be able to get clear away, Paul Ivanovitch?" she would ask. "From all we could learn, there was no great difficulty, Hope Ivanovna. It is not like Kara, you see. Will you pardon me reminding you again that here I am, Serge Petrovitch? Oh, I am sorry. I cannot get used to it. It is only that I fear if you call me Paul Ivanovitch in private, It may slip out at other times and lead to trouble. I will remember. You see, I have always thought of you as Paul Ivanovitch, and it is not easy to begin thinking of you as Serge Petrovitch. I know, and I am sorry for the necessity. If it were not of importance, I would not ask it. And when do you think is the soonest we could hear from him? He would get away in the early spring. It might take him some months to get back to Russia. He would strike up north, which would make it longer but safer. Then he would seek you first. Where would he learn that you had come out after him? Old Masha would tell him that, if he found her. He would seek her at once when he could not find you. Where would she be? I had to send her back to her people in old Chersoneso. They had been very good to me when I was ill, when my baby was born. Ah, God, yes, with a face full of sympathy. I did not dare to ask you, Hope Ivanovna. Serge told me. What? Did it? Oh. He died, and I was glad. Such a dear little fellow, but when he was dead I knew it was best so. It was very sore upon you, Hope Ivanovna. It was hard to lose him, but I knew it was better for him, and so I did not mourn for him, and in my heart I have him always. It was only round the stove at night, however, that they had time for disjointed conversation, or as the case might be, for brooding thought. Pavloff was working energetically with brain and hand to stamp out the hidden germs of typhus from the prison cameras, as far as that was possible without burning the whole place down. It was an almost impossible task. Hercules himself would have given it up in despair and applied the cleansing flame. He talked hard and worked harder. But the governor, absolute as were his powers over his prisoners, would not authorize the expenditure of a single ruble on sanitary matters without express permission from headquarters. Rubles were none too plentiful and had to be accounted for to the last kopeck. Men and women were sent there because they were superfluous, as Zazarin tersely put it. Lives are cheap, but money is always dear. If we tell them a man is dead, that ends it, but rubles never die, and we have to account for them. And Hope had the housework to attend to, and since it was but a small house, and she had much time and a natural instinct for neatness and making the most of things, she brought and kept it up to such a high plane of comfort that Paul Pavloff hardly knew himself in it. Comfortable, in a way, it always had been under Madame Roskova's rough and ready housekeeping. But Anna Vassilyevna's time had always been subject to many outside calls from the sick and needy ones, which had not yet fallen upon the newcomer, and, well, Hope's ideas of comfort went further than Anna Vassilyevna's. Pavloff was so full of his Augean labors that he must discuss them with her of a night, and Hope rejoiced in the new element as a relief from the tension of those long, brooding silences, which at times became beyond endurance, painful. Then Madame Roskova began to bring in her friends, who had been waiting impatiently to make Madame Palma's acquaintance, and once they began coming, the little house was rarely free of them. For since the privilege of visiting among themselves was about the only privilege the free command possessed, they availed themselves of it to the full. Their lives were hard and meager, but in many cases their capacities for enthusiasm and even their enthusiasms had survived their sufferings. How they managed to live on the trifling allowance made by the paternal government, they would have found it difficult to explain. Their condition, indeed, was almost analogous to that of the proverbial villagers who wrung a livelihood out of one another's washing. Anna Roskova, for instance, earned scanty kopecks by mending and stitching for the officers of the guard. Then there were occasional trifling remittances from friends at home, some of which reached them and some of which did not. But all helped one another, and among them they fought the wolf from the door. They were most of them men and women of education and utterly unused to manual labor, save such as the mines had painfully taught them. And since there was no opening for the professions, even if they had been allowed to follow them, they just grubbed along from hand to mouth as best they could and stubbornly refused to starve. They ate little and thought and talked much. Paul Pavloff, whom they knew only as Serge Palma, was better circumstanced than most by reason of his quasi-official duties. But his own wants were of the smallest, and his hand and house and slim purse had always been open to all who needed help. Naturally, that house became the life center of the community, and had rarely been without visitors of an evening, until the arrival of that least expected of all visitors turned the world upside down for some of them. While Hope lay in the little inner room, desiring nothing but quiet, Anna Roskova had rigidly forbidden visitors the house, and the cheerfulness of the community suffered eclipse. Now that the shadow had passed, they returned with doubled enjoyment, and Hope need never lack company. They rejoiced in her courage, encompassing that wearisome journey, and one and all made much of her. They brought her books and papers, such as they had, and were ready to sit and talk by the hour of Russia and their nipped hopes and blighted endeavors. When the distasteful day was over, they came quietly in, one by one, and over the steaming samovar of coarse brick tea lived their lives again, and even ventured at times to entertain hopes of the future. Their eulogies of Serge Petrovich, his courage, his self-denial, his sympathetic care of both hale and sick, knew no end. They rang the changes on his high qualities of heart and mind, till, when she remembered that the Serge Petrovich of these encomiums was not her Serge Petrovich, she sometimes tired of hearing them. And again, at times, as the praises of this Serge Petrovich were ringing in her ears, they would attach themselves by some strange perversion of the senses to that other Serge, and she would think more tenderly of him than ever. And then, when one by one the rest had crept quietly away to their comfortless little homes, envious somewhat perhaps of the happiness of Palma and his beautiful wife, they too would sit brooding over the handful of ashes in the stove, thinking out their own thoughts, their elbows almost touching, but between them a great fixed gulf. Is he alive or is he dead? Hope would ask herself. Is he in outer exile or pining in prison? Or has he won through to freedom, and is he spending himself and risking himself trying to find out what has become of me? Shall we ever learn what has become of him? How long shall I wait here? Where can I go if I leave? And all her questions remained perpetual questions, and there was no answer to any of them. And Pavloff, at her elbow, gazed steadily into the little core of rosy life among the gray ashes, and asked himself, is he alive or dead? Shall we ever get word from him? And if we do not, what is to become of Hope Ivanovna? She will not be content to remain here. And yet, he wished her nothing but good. To compass her happiness, he would willingly lay down his life, as he had done once already in taking Serge's place at the mines. He wished Serge nothing but good. He had proved it. And yet. If Serge was dead, if the fiction of their lives could blossom into fact, the glory and the joy of it, the heaven of Kara, he would ask no better than to live there and die there, so she were there too. How was it possible to restrain such thoughts with that quiet figure at his elbow, with the sweet, clear-cut face and the great brooding eyes? But when at last she rose and he quietly bade her good night, though his voice told nothing of what was in him and the shadows veiled his eyes and face, she read him like a book and held him in honor because of the strong, true heart that was in him. And when she was gone, he unrolled his mattress and stretched himself on it before the stove and dreamed of heaven on earth in a Kara hut, such as none but he would have rejoiced in, unless he were blessed with the love of a Hope Ivanovna. Chapter 15. How Pavloff learned hard lessons. So the wintry days of their strange, anomalous life dragged on, and held no weariness of waiting for Paul Pavloff, rather a fullness of content, as of one who, believing his treasure was lost to him forever, has unexpectedly found it again. But it was not so with Hope, and Pavloff got many an amazing sight into the sealed book, and learned more of women's ways than most men learn in a lifetime. For he had his regular duties outside, which kept his highest faculties alert and active. And she had too much time for painful thought. And to a woman of Hope Palma's nature, the very fact of having to live and act so flagrant a lie as circumstances had forced her into, was to her feelings as the rasping of a file on a raw wound. At times her heart grew sick with the weary indefiniteness of it all. She said to herself that she might wait and wait forever, and waiting is the hardest work in the world. Then, when the fit was on her, she would break out as she brooded over the fire of a night. Is this to go on forever? Shall we ever hear from him? In their private intercourse, she had come to discard the use of any appellation when addressing him. It lent a curtness to her speech, which was foreign to her, but he understood her feeling and suffered it without resentment. Paul Ivanovich, she must not call him, and Sergei Petrovich felt to her each time like a fresh endorsement of the lie that troubled her. We shall hear in time, Hope Ivanovna. You say it, but shall we? Defiantly. Suppose we never hear. Then, but we shall hear, Hope Ivanovna. There has barely been time yet for word to come, even if he got through at once. If I could shorten the time for you, I would, but I cannot. It breaks my heart to think of him searching and finding nothing and wondering what has become of me. It is very sore for you, but we are doing the only thing possible. In the spring, I will join a convoy and go back and look for him. If you think well, he would answer gloomily. But where you would look, I do not know. He might well be on his way back here in some guise or other, and then you would pass him on the road. You do not want me to go, she would fling at him. I would give my life to serve you, Hope Ivanovna. But I could not counsel you to go in search of him, for I fear it would be fruitless. He promised to let me know in such a way that no censor could guess what he meant. The moment we hear, I will do everything in my power to further your going. Till then, you are safest here, and I think Serge would have it so. At other times, she would fall into such a state of dull depression that Pavloff could hardly get a word out of her. And then he went gloomily and watched anxiously for a recrudescence of the sickness from which she had suffered at Irkutsk. But it was heart sickness that at such times made the body seem sick, and she would not allow him to doctor her. And again, in the baffling vagaries of her brooding thought, she would find herself doubting him whom her better self knew to be the very soul of honor. And more than once, her resentment at this sore bondage of fate showed itself unworthily in words that cut like arrows. It was all his fault. If he had let Serge come on to the mines, she would have found him there. It was Pavloff's stupid interference that had set everything wrong and landed them all in this hateful coil. And Pavloff, if he understood but dimly, trusted much, for he loved much. He suffered acutely because his hands were tied. There was nothing he could do but bear with her, always with the utmost gentleness, and that he did. It is Hope Ivanovna, he would say to himself, and she is tried beyond bearing. He had given his life for her husband's, and she resented it and regarded him as an interferer. It taxed his equanimity to the utmost at times, but never by word or look did he show sign of what was in him, nor did he ever depart by a hair's breadth from the straight line he had laid down for himself. He kept strictest guard on voice and look, and tuned them delicately to the necessities of the case, and bore with her patiently like the gallant gentleman he was. But if he never flinched under her flailings, and showed no sign of wound, she knew when her arrows pierced. Then, in due course, she would recognize the wrong she had done him, and the swing of the pendulum would carry her to the other extreme. To salve the wounds she had dealt, she would unbend towards him and become sweetness itself. To wipe out the memory of her ungraciousness, she would become more than gracious. And then in turn, and it needed a stout heart and a set jaw at times, for her sweetness was harder to be borne than her undeserved bitterness. It seemed to be he who was cold and hard and held her at a distance. But these were her extremes. Between times and always, except when these gloomy fits mastered her, she was just her own sweet, high-spirited, clear-souled self, deeply interested in all his doings and in the welfare of the community, and life became sweet to Paul Pavloff. If ever man was tried and tested to his heights and depths, it was Pavloff in this earlier period of their companionship. To live in such strange case with the one woman who was more to him than all the rest of the world, so close to her, one with her to the general eye, bound by the exigencies of the case, to tender her before others, all those little observances of affection in which his heart would have rejoiced beyond words had they only been real, Outwardly, all the happiness he had ever dared to hope for. Inwardly, the keen sting of the mockery of it all. Yes, he suffered much. Without sorrow, no one liveth in love, says old Kempis. But at the heart of the sting was that keen, deep joy which is the very soul and core of love. Can one wonder that his thoughts slipped brakes at times and ran wild and free? The wonder would have been if they had not, for after all, he was but human. Suppose no word ever came from Palma. He had done all he could for his friend, but at best his chances were about even. Some indeed escaped. Thousands got away every spring and blindly prowled the steppes and forests till the winter drove them in again. But the percentage who got clear away to freedom was not large. Still, there was always the chance, and Serge Palma had staked on that chance, and he was a man of intelligence and resource and would strain every nerve to win through. And if no word came, then, well, it would either mean that he had failed and been recaptured, or that he was dead, which was much the same thing, or there was the trouble that the word he had sent had never got through. He might even then be vainly striving after news of his wife, while she sat here waiting in vain for news of him. And so it might go on, month after month, till hope grew desperate. Then she would desperately set out to find him, an utterly hopeless task, to search the whole wide world to find one man, and that man as like as not dead. If no word came, their position would remain just as it was until hope left him and was lost to him forever. While she remained, he felt as a man may feel with whom a priceless gem is left in trust and lies for safety in his banker's care. He gets no actual good of it. He dare not wear it. He may look at it at times, that is all. But still the knowledge that it is there and in his charge gives him a certain glow of satisfaction. Just so Paul Pavloff carried in his inmost heart the priceless jewel of his love for Hope Palma. She belonged to another, and that other his friend, and so to him she was sacred. But no power on earth could keep him from worshipping her with all the might that was in him. But dimly behind all this lurked two possibilities, either of which might solve the situation. The one, that Palma, if recaptured, might be sent to the Kara mines, a more than likely possibility. For though the officials, for the benefit of their own pockets, might wink at escapes, recapture entailed severest punishment. The other, that definite news might reach them from Serge himself of his escape, or through some of the constantly arriving prisoners that he was dead. In his capacity of doctor, pending the arrival of a successor to the late official, Paul had access to the prisons, and he questioned all newcomers cautiously for news. But in this the utmost care was necessary, for his position was utterly irregular and in flagrant contravention of all official rules. It was dependent on the caprice of a man who had every reason to regard him as an obstacle in his path. It was only the general fear of a further outbreak of the terrible prison scourge which permitted him to exercise his profession at all. For typhus is no respecter of uniforms, and when once it got loose, there was no knowing where it would stop. Colonel Zazarin dropped in occasionally to see if Madame Palma was sickening of life at Kara. The gendarmes called at least once every day, as they did at the house of every out prisoner, to see that they were still there, and of friendlier visitors she had no lack. But at times, Hope Palma's heart grew so weary of this shadowed waiting that she came to feel at last that news of any kind, even the worst, would be better than no news at all. Chapter 16. How they sat side by side with a gulf between. One day, as winter was drawing towards the spring, Pavloff received a customary order to inspect a convoy of newly arrived prisoners. Since the epidemic of the previous year, the officials had exercised unusual precautions, more with a view, however, to their own safety than from any special care for the rest. These entailed no expenditure of money and little trouble for themselves. Each convoy, as it arrived, was carefully inspected, for life in the etops was an inducement to disease. To one who had passed through those hotbeds of vice and infection himself, it seemed a miracle that any could possibly come through uncontaminated. The authorities at St. Petersburg busy just then with more important matters, had taken no slightest notice of the governor's request for a successor to the late medical officer. So Pavloff, in the exercise of his duties, subjected every arrival, male and female, to careful examination and promptly isolated every suspicious case. With a view to the utilization of waste material, they were tended in hospital by female prisoners of some standing, under the distant but arbitrary oversight of Cossack sentries, whose natural density led them at times to interfere between nurses and patients when neither had dreamt for a moment of overstepping the most rigid disciplinary bounds. But they were, for the most part, dull-witted, low-browed, bullet-headed fellows, whose narrow understandings were capable of little beyond the fact that these were prisoners, and they their warders. Coarse-grained by nature, their feelings had become pachyderm through constant contact with suffering humanity, and their highest aspirations might safely have been packed into a glass of vodka. Many a strange meeting took place in that wretched hospital. In spite of the vigilance of the officials, it became a regular bureau of information concerning the happenings in the outside world. The news, indeed, that trickled through was many months old, but it was of a very definite character, and concerned matters of very special interest, which the rigid censorship would never have admitted in any other way. For the letters to the Free Command were subject to severest scrutiny and most abominable mutilation, and reached them occasionally, when they reached them at all, in fragments which taxed their ingenuity sorely at times to make head or tail of. Among the abjects subjected to Pavloff's scrutiny that day was one whom he recognized, in spite of travel wear and tangle, and a quick glance of surprise passed between them. Mikhail Barenin had been one of the circle in Odessa to which Hope Arskaya and himself, and later Serge Palma, had belonged. Paul promptly consigned him to hospital as a suspicious case, and presently visited him there. "So you have come to join us, Mikhail Mikhailovich?" he whispered, as he laid a professional hand on his patient's wrist. "And you, Paul Ivanovich? How come you on the side of the oppressors?" "Force of circumstances. The doctor died of typhus. They were scared out of their lives, so they let me take his place till a new one comes. It enables me to serve my friends at times. But listen, Mikhail Mikhailovich, and do not forget, I changed names on the road with Serge Palma, and here I am, known by his name. I will remember. You may wear it without fear of disturbance." "How? You have news? Tell me quick." And his heart was in his throat at thought of what this might possibly mean for him, and to Hope. "Serge Petrovich Palma is dead. He was shot in an attempt to escape." Pavloff's face burned red as his released heart sent the hot blood whirling on its way. He ground his teeth to keep his face from twisting. He closed his eyes for a moment, lest the light in them should blaze his secret abroad. "You are sure of this, Mikhail Mikhailovich?" he asked, when his thumping heart gave him leave to speak. "Quite sure of the report. I was not there to see, but it was accepted as true before I left." "We will speak of it again," as the Cossack sentry sauntered towards them. "I can keep you here for some days. The rest will do you good. Remember, I am Serge Palma." The other nodded and closed his eyes wearily. The comforts of a prison hospital were slight, but it was heaven compared with the pestiferous étapes and crowded cameras and the drudgery of the mines. Paul Pavloff had enough to occupy his mind that day, and as he lay on his mattress before the stove at night, his thoughts tossed him to and fro and gave him little rest. Before morning, he had decided that Mikhail Barenin must be told of Hope's presence there and how it came about. For an unlikely, but still possible, chance encounter between them, even at a distance, might otherwise lead to trouble. As to telling Hope of the report of Sarge's death, he could not make up his mind. He debated it with and against himself, and tried to look at it in every possible light. If he could have been absolutely assured of its truth, he would not have hesitated, but he could not be sure. It might be true. It might very likely be true. It was just as likely to be true as not. "Nay," he said to himself at last, "it was more likely to be true than not," and thereupon brought himself to with a round turn and took himself soberly to task. For after all, looked it coldly, calmly, judicially, Points of view only to be arrived at after severest condemnation of the self-confessed prisoner at the bar. It might not be true, and above all thought of himself was his thought for her, and I of her. For do what he would, now that the door of possibility, of probability, must he with shame confess it, of hope, was unlatched by Mikhail Barenin's news, his thoughts refused the leash and ran freely. They leapt barriers and climbed ladders whose end might rest in Kara snows, but whose summits touched rosy heavens. For a man may control his judgment, his words, his looks, but his thoughts have a will of their own and a way of their own, and when they take the bit, it is time for him to pray that he may be delivered from evil. He saw Barenin again next day, and under cover of a careful examination of his patient, while the sentry looked on suspiciously from a distance, he managed to tell him what he wished. "Put out your tongue, Barenin," he said, "and listen to me before the watchdog barks. Hope Palma is here. Keep your tongue out, man. She came expecting to find her husband, of course. We have been waiting news. I have not told her yet, lest it should not be true. I am supposed to be Palma. She is supposed to be my wife. She lives in my house since it is not safe for a woman to live here alone. But she lives only in hope of word from Palma, so that she may join him. Now you understand the situation." "I understand." There was a twinkle in his eye as he added, "For your sake, I hope the news is true. I wish only her happiness. We know that, who know you. It was a surprise to us all when she married Palma. Everyone thought. Here comes the sentry. Your wrist? So, you must remain here a day or two still. I will see you tomorrow." At home, he imposed so strict a guard upon himself, lest the tumult which Barenin's news had excited in him should escape in look or tone, that to Hope it seemed that he had suddenly become cold and distant as never before. Time and restored health had made her almost her old self again, capable once more of calm, wide views of life, and less given to fits of bitter despondency, though these indeed still came upon her at times. Now, taking blame to herself for his coldness, she tried back in her mind for cause given and failed to find it in spite of most rigorous searching. She knew him too well to believe him capable of ill feeling for her past offenses, and had she not shown him by subsequent gracious meekness that her declensions came not of herself, but of her circumstances? Finally, unaware of the fundamental upheaval wrought in him by Barenin's news, she said to herself that the complexities of their position were trying them both too hardly, and that the time had come for a change. Yet where to go, and what to do? Any move might be the wrong one, and deprive her of the news for which she was waiting. She could not, like Anna Roskova, find another lodging. For where should Serge Palma's wife live except with Serge Palma? And as to getting away, the risks and difficulties would be enormous. The nightmare horrors of the convoys and rest houses still overwhelmed her at times, and deep in heart, unacknowledged, not to be thought about but still there, was a deep, comforting sense of peace and security in Pavloff's guardianship, and a very great disinclination to lose it. She was at her wit's end, and sorely troubled in her mind as to what course to pursue. Paul had not dared to tell her of Barenin's presence at Kara. She would inevitably ask if he brought any news, and then he must disclose the whole matter. Meanwhile, he gripped his heart and treated her with the gravest courtesy. He provided for her comfort in every way within the compass of his power and the limited possibilities of Kara. But by reason of the fire that was in him, he bore himself coldly perforce, hard as it was to do so, lest the slightest divergence from his narrow line should lead him astray into the open country of his heart's desire, and show her that which he was doing his best to keep from her. And she, trust her, she knew, somewhat at all events, of that which was in him, in spite of all his iciness and aloofness. And perhaps she feared somewhat for herself, and perhaps she feared somewhat for him, but always, except at those rarer and rarer intervals when her heart got twisted awry with the long strain of waiting, she thought of him warmly and gratefully. Yet now and again, after sitting in long silence before the stove of a night, the falseness and awkwardness of their position would spur her to speech, though the result was always the same. "And how much longer are we to go on in this way?" she would jerk out. What would you do, Hope Ivanovna? Oh, I do not know, but I feel that I ought to be going. Where would you go? At which she would shake her head hopelessly. I do not know, but I feel myself a burden to you. You know better, Hope Ivanovna, and he would strive to make that statement as colorless as possible. Shall we ever hear? She would ask. God knows. And he thought of Baronin. They never got much further than that, and she remained there, waiting for the news which never came, a captivity of the spirit harder to bear in some respects than the thraldom of the minds, though here indeed redeeming features were not entirely lacking. But as time passed, and the absence of the promised word from Serge himself lent countenance to Baronin's news, Paul decided at last that she must be told. He was quite aware that the anxiously expected letter might even then be lying in the hands of the officials as a suspect, might have been there for months, might never be delivered. Such things were by no means uncommon. Many a perfectly innocent letter, full of homely tidings into which morbid officialism read things undreamt of by the writer, was never delivered at all, and many a heart sickened and died of starvation in consequence. He had a great fear, too, that this news of Baronin's, when she heard it, might bring about changes in their delicate relationship. Changes which might not be for the better. It seemed to him, indeed, at times that matters could hardly be more trying for them than they were, and yet there was no knowing. This word of Baronin's might be like the dropping of an acid into a delicate solution, resulting in spicules and facets, in the instant formation of frosty points and angles where, before, all was colorless quiescence and limpid clearness. For after all, Hope Ivanovna was a woman, and little as he knew of women and their ways, he had seen enough of late to know that they are unaccountable at times and not to be understood of men. She would regard him with different eyes. Would her glance be more kindly, or would he find there or imagine new suspicions of himself and all his motives? She would understand, in part at all events, the coldness and aloofness to which he had schooled himself so rigorously. Would she ascribe it to fear on his own account or on hers? Would she, after all, understand that his coldness was meant in kindness? That if he had been over cold, it had been through fear of being over kind? For while Serge lived, if Serge lived, he stood between them as inviolable as a law of God. But if Serge were indeed dead, then there was no law of God or man that could keep them apart, if both their hearts so willed it. No further news filtered through to them. Serge's promised letter never came, and at last he decided to tell her, and having decided, still put off the telling from day to day in dread of the result. Then one night, as they sat in silence before the stove, he said abruptly, "You remember Mikhail Baronin?" "Surely," she said quickly, and gazed at him hungrily. It was a link with the past. It might mean news. "He is here, in the prison." "Ah," she said with a quick swallow of her hopes and fears. "And he brings news?" "He brings a rumor, but it may not be true." His words prepared her for ill news. She eyed him anxiously. "He says that when he left Odessa, it was understood there that Serge had been shot in attempting to escape." "Ah!" she gasped. "And it was through you." Then her little round chin sunk onto her chest, and her bosom heaved convulsively. "Yes," he began bitterly, "it was through me," and stopped. It was unjust, cruelly unjust, but he choked it down and sat in silence, gazing into the ashes. Jangled heartstrings emit strange discords at times, even in a man, and he knew it. And this was a woman, and the woman he loved more than anything on earth. All the same, as he sat there, life felt to him like a handful of gray ashes. All his hopes were trembling in the balance, but not by a word would he sway the balance either way. Give her time, he said to himself. It is Hope Ivanovna. She will come to herself. And she did, for the sobs died away at last, and presently she stretched a trembling hand round towards him and said falteringly, "Forgive me, my friend. I was unjust. You did it for the best." He took her hand very gently and bent and kissed it, and she got up and went away to her closet. The gray morning light showed how little she had slept. Her face was white and anxious. The circles round her eyes were darker than ever. Her first words were, "When did Mikhail Berenin come?" "3 months ago." "And you have known it all this time." "Oh, why?" "We do not know even yet that it is true, Hope Ivanovna." "Does Mikhail believe it is true?" "He said it was generally accepted as true," he said gravely, "but rumor often lies, and rumor from Siberia." "Why did you not tell me before?" "I did not wish to distress you." "Why did you tell me now?" "I thought much before I did so. I tried to view the matter from all points. I decided at last that it was right you should know. I could not but see the distress the long suspense is causing you." "It is terrible," she said miserably. "It will kill me. This not knowing if he is alive is worse almost than knowing that he is dead. It leaves us hope." "Hope dies of want," she said sadly. "Hope must not die," he said. "When hope dies, life is not worth living." It was bravely said, for he could not but know that if that other hope did finally die through lapse of time, then there might be hope. Aye, and hope for him.